Hi, and welcome to the Changing Perspectives podcast, the show where we discuss a variety of topics including grief, parenting, health and wellness, and relationships. Join us and explore a number of changing perspectives. We're your hosts, Jenni and Josh Brennan. Hi, Jenni.
Hi there.
What's going on?
Not much.
So we are at episode 21.
We are.
We're like killing it. I feel like it's just episode after episode.
Well, that's what happens when we have 2 episodes a week.
That's true. So welcome everybody, episode 21. Today we're going to talk about anxiety.
We are. So this is a topic that I think is kind of a hot button topic out there. Like I feel like it's a sort of catchphrase now. Like everybody has anxiety. Everybody also has OCD. That's like, do you hear this from people? Like
Kinda,
my OCD is acting up.
Yeah,
I hear it. People are kind of self-diagnosing themselves with anxiety and OCD. That's sort of the big things now.
Speaking of OCD, I feel like I can't start an episode without reminding everybody where to find us and to like us and review us. So I'm going to dive right into that.
You're really going to interrupt me?
I'm really going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Like us, review us, follow us, guys. Give us a rating on iTunes. Again, every day there's more listeners, more followers, so we really appreciate it. Check out the previous episodes and email us, contact us. Let us know what you want us to take a stab at. If you listened to yesterday's episode, we released a tiny pint-sized perspectives, a little review on a show on Netflix called Dead to Me, and that was pretty much straight out of a recommendation from friends of ours, to our listeners. So email us, let us know what you want us to cover, and we'll do our best to do that. So, sorry, that was my OCD acting up.
Okay, but you don't really have OCD.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
However, I think that there are a lot of people out there that struggle with anxiety, and whether or not it's an actual diagnosis, like a generalized anxiety disorder or not, I think that the way that our lives are now, we have a lot of pressure on us. And so the result of that can be this awful feeling of anxiety. So anytime I write an article about anxiety or post about anxiety, it kind of blows up. And I read that as like, not that my writings on anxiety are better than my other writings, but that they speak to people more, and that people are really kind of desperate for some support around anxiety and insight around anxiety. So I thought it was probably time for us to do something, cover that on our podcast. So when I talk about anxiety, I'm talking about things like, you know, your mind is racing. You can't keep up. You sort of can't. A lot of people feel anxiety physically in their body. Sometimes it can kind of be like a tightness in their chest, stomach issues. A lot of sort of GI, gastrointestinal issues are actually anxiety related.
Interesting.
Yeah, people just sort of
there's physical manifestations. I know your eye used to twitch, or maybe it still does. Remember?
My eye still twitches, but that's more not when I'm anxious. That's more when I'm overtired.
Okay.
That's like an exhaustion. But usually I'm exhausted when I'm overwhelmed and anxious. And as I've gotten older, I've become a much more anxious person. I think I've always been anxious. I've always been a high achiever. And I think that for many of us with anxiety is a coping strategy. You know, if we could just be perfect enough, if we could be good enough, then that will sort of manage some of our anxious feelings and thoughts. It doesn't necessarily help, but it becomes sort of a bad habit.
Right.
And so now that I have children, there's more for me to worry about.
Yes.
So I remember the day our oldest got on the bus for the first time in kindergarten, and it was like a switch turned on my anxiety, and I was like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Now I really have stuff to worry about because I'm not with him. Like he's on a bus with a stranger and a bunch of kids, and he's at like not a tiny little preschool now, but a school 5 days a week. And so as a parent, I think a lot of us experience an increase in anxiety as our children get older and as they enter into adolescence, and we realize like, oh crap, again, we have like zero control over them. They're out there.
That was scary, man. Like I remember that, like that element of, I remember I was so against the buses.
I don't remember that.
No, I'm driving them.
I don't remember that, but
I'm
sounds
driving
like
them.
you.
Nope, I'm not gonna. I don't trust the buses.
And then you did the car drop-off line for a little bit, and you were like, "Forget this.
Get on the bus."
No, I think we always let them take the bus for the social aspect.
Yeah, absolutely, it's important.
Yeah. So it's sort of a real issue out there. It really can interfere with people's quality of life.
Can be debilitating.
Absolutely. And really, even if it's not debilitating, it can just feel lousy.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about sort of some tips on how to handle that. Just some stats though to start. This is from the National Institute of Mental Health, a couple years old here, 2016. There's over 40 million adults in the U.S. who report some level of anxiety. That's 18% of the population. And for over 4% of those individuals, so almost 5%, they rank that as severe. So really kind of debilitating there. So if you kind of apply that to your own life, and you sort of look at the adults around you, there's a pretty big chance that 20% of them are suffering from anxiety.
Right.
And that's really like 1 out of every 5 people you know. So think about the people you work with, the people that you spend your days with, your friends, your family, and imagine 20% of them have anxiety. I feel like this is something people are more comfortable talking about now. Anxiety and somewhat depression, people are starting to share a little bit more when they suffer with these things.
It's definitely different than it was like 10 years ago.
For sure. But I think there's still a lot of people that don't. So there could be a lot of people in your life that are battling this and they just don't share it. They don't feel comfortable sharing it. So if that is you, listen up. If it's not you, still listen up, because you might have folks in your life that are struggling with anxiety and maybe need you to be there for them.
Yeah.
So I've got 10 tips for people here. Not magic strategies, but tips that you can kind of think about and maybe make some adjustments to your life to start kind of adjusting, self-correcting a little bit of the anxiety here.
Before you dive into the tips, there's just, and I don't think you said this yet, but on our website, changingperspectivesblog.com, you'll find 10 best ways to cope with strategy. Oh my God, to cope with strategy. Yeah, that's what it was. The 10 best ways to manage anxiety. Okay. Written by Jenni.
For the record, my eye is twitching now.
Oh, okay.
So maybe it is a...
Oops, sorry. I didn't mean to.
I guess you have stress.
Throw
maybe
you
it
into
is
that
stress.
physical manifestation of anxiety. But you had written, quote, "You might find that you are starting to turn to some unhealthy coping tools such as cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, and food. You might find that your anxiety is causing you to miss work, cancel social activities, and even start to impact your physical health." So it's important to, before you get to that point, to consider some of these things you're about to.
True. Good point. Thank you for pulling that out.
Sure.
Do you want to go through?
Oh, sure. I'll read it.
Okay.
So number 1, the first tip in managing anxiety, not strategies for coping, is what I said. Let go of perfection.
Yeah, I think that there's pressure out there, especially on moms. I don't know. I mean, maybe you can speak to this as a dad, but I feel like there's a lot of pressure out there on moms to be perfect, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect friend, the perfect employee, the perfect PTO volunteer, perfect.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this in a few steps here, sort of social media that sort of perpetuates that.
Yeah.
But nobody can be perfect. We're not perfect. We're human. And I know for me, I spoke sort of about my tendency to sort of be a high achiever and kind of to lean into that as sort of a strategy throughout my life. And in college, I realized, I don't think I realized it. I think it was through therapy. At some point, the distinction was made. What if you just stopped trying to be the best? Because I was always trying to be like the best at everything.
Right.
What if I stopped trying to be the best and just try to do my best?
Yeah.
Taking into account where I am, that sometimes I'm going to be more tired. Sometimes I'm going to have less access to my resources. Sometimes I'm just going to be less motivated. And so my best on, this week might be a B on a test versus my best next week might be an A on a test. And I try to apply that to our children when we're talking about really school performance, not having them focus on being like the best athlete or the best student, but to really kind of work towards being their best.
Right.
Do you feel that pressure to be perfect? I
think it's a little different. I mean, and we can't speak on behalf of all moms and all dads, of course, or parents. But for me, I think there's pressure to have the nicest yard and to take care of things from that perspective. You wrote here in the article, stop trying to prove your worth. Stop trying to live up to people in your life that you think are perfect. Stop trying to be the best. And, you consistently compare yourself to everybody around you and everything that you view as
Me
success.
personally,
I
or
think just in
you?
general, I do for sure.
Oh, people.
You know,
People.
Yeah, and in looking at comparing yourself and your performance to what you view as success, and that can be very anxiety inducing. And that's I guess that's my version of what you described that you're dealing with.
Yeah, that
and
makes
you wrote,
sense.
Honestly, stop. None of that is true. And I think that's really important, that you don't have to be the best. You don't have to live up to everybody around you. You don't have to try to prove your worth consistently and constantly.
Right. That kind of notion that like, if your child has, has fingernails that need to be clipped, I'm laughing because we realized this like 2 days ago. We looked at our youngest and we were like, oh my God, you
what
need to clip your fingernails.
He's trying to like get into the Guinness Book of World Records for long fingernails. I'm like, do you feel that?
No, kids don't know. Yeah, listen to Raising Aliens.
Yeah.
Then if you didn't listen to our episode Raising Aliens, go find that one. But that I think very quickly can, and for me it did in that moment. I went to, oh crap, people are going to think I'm a terrible mom.
Yeah.
So because my child's fingernails were too long, and somehow I've missed that. Now I'm not perfect. I'm a neglectful mom. People are going to think I'm terrible. People are going to think like God only knows what goes on behind closed doors here. Like it starts this sort of catastrophizing in my head. Like it means that all of this other stuff must be true then about myself. And really, when we're thinking about anxious thoughts and anxious thought patterns, it becomes a cycle. It's like a never ending cycle, and you need something to stop it. And so I'm telling you, stop. And I say this to my patients. I advocate for people talking to themselves. I know that's really weird, but I do, because sometimes we need to actually say out loud, Jenny, stop, to ourselves. Stop. It doesn't matter. Because the voice in our head can be pretty loud. We've been living with that voice for our entire life. And so it's hard to then correct that and stop it. So yes, I say stop. It's not true. And so often our thoughts can become our own worst enemy. So stop trying to be perfect, because none of us are ever going to be perfect. We are imperfect people. And that's a good thing, that we're not robots.
Well, and I think that you should talk to yourself in the middle of the grocery store, because that'd just be fun.
Yes,
or Target. I
know of someone who says stop shoulding all over yourself. The should.
Yeah.
Like, I should do this. I should have done that. I should do this. That's not good for any of us.
No.
So really stop using it like that to yourself. Right. So really kind of letting go of perfection is the first step. It's a really hard step. It's a process. It's not like you're going to be driving in your car and thinking, oh, Jenny said to let go of perfection. Yeah, I'm a human. I'm not perfect. Okay, cool. I'm not anxious anymore. No, I get it. Yeah. What I'm talking about is really kind of getting into your thoughts and recognizing your thought patterns and figuring out, this is also something I tell my patients, is to really listen to, like, start to really lean into what you're thinking. So they're like, so you want me to really kind of like lean into all of the crap that's in my head and talk to myself. And I said, I know, I understand that, but that's how we really can start to kind of listen and hear what we're saying to ourselves, because we're not always aware of what that thought pattern is. So really kind of lean into that, listen to it, and then tell it to shut up and really kind of reality check it. Yeah. And tell it to stop. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say let go of perfection.
First step, let go of perfection.
Yes.
Step 2, I like this one. Rethink social media.
Yeah, social media can be great, right? It allows us to like stay connected to.
You learn a lot of stuff.
You learn a lot of stuff?
Yeah, like, you learn what's going on. Like, we know what's going on with the kids' schools and stuff because of all the social.
Oh, sure, yeah. So social media has become a primary mode of contact. I think actually when our kids reach high school, if they go to the one in town, that's how all of the sports teams communicate, is through Twitter.
Well, and then I'm pretty sure I haven't picked up a newspaper in years. Like, I get all my news from social media.
Yeah, that's a problem. Really good. But yeah, it's a source of information. I was thinking about social media in terms of like connecting. It allows us to like stay connected in an easier way to people from like high school and other towns and places that we used to work, and kind of feel like we still kind of know what's going on. It also has wonderful like social groups, right? Like there's support groups online for people that are grieving, or people that are trying to lose weight, or people that are dealing with the struggles of like parenting,
or fans of a podcast.
Yeah. So social media can be great. The downfall to social media is that it's fake. Right.
Yes.
There's not a lot of people out there saying, okay, here's me and here's my messy house and here's my kid's long fingernails. It's a lot of people saying, here's the perfect selfie.
Although one of our friends is really good at that.
At what?
Being real, Mrs. Get Burley.
Yes.
Her account is hilarious because
yes.
she's real.
Because she's real.
Yeah.
And I think that's why so many people like her, is that she's saying like, I'm not perfect and none of us are perfect and it's okay. And I think we should do more of that. You know, like post a selfie that's not beautiful, that you haven't, you know, tried to take 55 different times and you're picking the best one. Like, be real. So I'm saying this because rethinking social media, if you're someone who's beating yourself up, if your self-talk is about how you're not perfect and you're lousy because you're not perfect, and then you're going onto social media and you're seeing all these other moms who have it together, their kids are like, their hair is always cut perfectly and their fingernails are always short and they're always wearing matching clothes and they're always smiling and getting along and hugging in all their pictures and their house is always clean. It's easy to think, well, they're perfect. Why aren't I perfect? Right. I can promise you they're not perfect. Everyone has their stuff. Just most people don't air their stuff on social media. Right. And I know there's some people that are like, you know, you shouldn't put that stuff on social media. You shouldn't put the bad stuff. I disagree, because the more we can kind of share, this is us, that we're real. We have flaws. We make mistakes. We hurt. We suffer. We're dealing with stuff. Our anxiety is here today. Our depression is there today. The better it is for everybody. That's just a more authentic experience. So rethink social media. If there are people on your feed who, when you're kind of seeing their posts, you have that little like, I don't know, feeling in your gut like, oh, I wish I could be like them. Like if it does something to you in a negative way, hide them. Yeah. You can like put them on break for 30 days. You don't have to like block them or send them a message saying you're too perfect and I'm not going to follow you anymore. You can just hide them from your feed. Right. You can still then choose on a Sunday to be like, I think I'm going to go check out their profile because I'm ready. I'm in a good place. I'm going to go check it out. But you're in control of it. Well, you wrote, resist the temptation to compare yourself. Yeah. Because that's what we do. Absolutely. We compare ourselves to everything else we see out there, especially on social media. And so it can be a source of pressure. Yeah. So rethink that, and also be aware that, you know, a lot of people are sort of scrolling mindlessly through social media. So you're not sure what you're going to come across that might be triggering for you. So I encourage you, if you are kind of dealing with some anxiety, you're in a really anxious place, to be aware that picking up your phone and starting to scroll through social media probably isn't going to make you feel better. No. Because what's going to happen when you come across something that makes you feel or makes that sort of self-talk pattern start, that like, oh, I wish I could be like them. Why don't I have my stuff together like them? Then you shouldn't be picking up your phone. It's not a good time. So rethink it. Just be really mindful about when you're engaging in social media and then what that's making you feel. And I think in a lot of ways, these first two tips go together. Letting go of perfection and be mindful of social media. For sure. Because you're just comparing yourself to everybody and all these perfect images you see, and you really, that's not healthy for your anxiety. Right. For sure. Okay. Tip number 3 is something I need help with. Make room for self-care. I think a lot of people need help with that. We don't really prioritize that. There's a lot of posts out there on social media and there's sort of a push to sort of take care of yourself, but there's still not a lot of permission around doing it. Yeah. Talk about that. I mean, how do you do that? How in the middle of a busy everything, with all these competing priorities, how do you do that? Like, how do you make time for yourself? You make it a priority. So I think a lot of people, they approach it as like, well, if there's time left over at the end of the day, I'll go to the gym. If there's time left over at the end of the day, I'll go sit outside on my patio with a cup, like a glass of wine or a cup of like ice water or iced tea. Or if there's time left over at the end of the weekend, I'll go for a walk. There's never time left over because we're so busy. Yeah. And so it just never happens. It always gets kind of pushed to tomorrow. So I think it's important. And listen, I'm not taking my own advice right now. I'm not doing a good job with self-care. Neither am I. Because I've got 4 classes going on right now. 2 of them are brand new to me. So I'm getting really froggy. Sorry. The allergies are really bad this week. Yes.
Yep. And it's a beautiful weekend. So
yes. So, and all the windows are open.
Yeah.
But so I'm making excuses, right? Like I'm investing all of this energy in classes, and I'm not making self-care a priority. The secret is to make it a priority, like to look at your week and plot out, okay, when can I fit in some self-care? And I say you have to start small. Like, could you find 5 minutes every day? Like literally 5 minutes. Could you schedule in 5 minutes at the start of your day? Or at work, could you actually take like a lunch, like not a working lunch at your desk?
I never do that.
I don't either. I book my patients back to back to back, so I don't get a break. But I'm choosing to do that. Or can you take 5 minutes at the end of the day and like schedule it in, set an alarm on your phone, hold it sacred? And a lot of people struggle with that. I had a patient a few weeks ago, and I said that to them, and they were horrified and looked at me, and they were like, I don't know if I could do that. And I was like, let's just try it and see what happens. And they came back the next week, and they were like, I couldn't do it. Like I couldn't carve out that 5 minutes because it's so counter to everything else that we do, especially as like moms, where it feels there's a lot of guilt around taking 5 minutes for yourself. So then I say something like, okay, can you tack 5 minutes on to like before you pull in your driveway, right? Especially for working moms, before you pull in your driveway at the end of your work day and you start to transition into your work night at home with the kids, can you pull into a parking lot for 5 minutes and just be? Like, can you listen to music? Can you like read a little bit of a book or something? Can you just sit there and do nothing?
Yeah.
Can you carve out 5 extra minutes somewhere? Start there. So really kind of your starting point is to think about what you would even want to do and when you might fit it in.
And you said in the article, block it out and schedule things around it.
Yeah. So like, just like we, someone at work might say, oh, are you free for like a 2:00 appointment? And if you've got another meeting scheduled, you would say, no, I have a meeting scheduled.
Yeah.
I'm saying do that. Prioritize.
So I've been getting a little bit better about this at work, but historically I've never really taken a lunch. I just work at my desk right through it.
Right.
Or I have a working meeting during lunch, and I know this is not right, but there's a group of people that always go to the kitchen at work and eat lunch like together, and I always walk by them on my way to my desk or whatever, going, how can they do that? How do they have enough time to sit down and have a lunch? And I realize that I shouldn't be thinking of them that way. I should be going, these guys are doing it right. Mm-hmm. They're taking a second to
especially as someone in a management position, right? Because I think this is for those of you that are in sort of a corporate position or really any kind of office location, that's the message comes from the top down. Like if people are not taking lunches, especially if the people at the top are setting the expectation that like you work through your lunch, you don't take a lunch, you eat your lunch at your desk, you have working lunches where you have meetings around lunchtime, then of course the people below you are going to think, oh, I can't do that because I'm going to look like I'm not perfect. Mm-hmm. You do. So here you are as a manager walking by and your sort of internal thought process is like, those lucky people, how do they, I guess they're not getting their work done. How are they so lucky? When really they're setting an example. Are they millennials?
A couple. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like the millennial generation kind of does a better job with this.
They do. There was one actually, no longer moved on to a different organization, but, there was a couple that were really good at it. Yeah. Like they clearly cut out that time for themselves. This is what they're doing. Didn't bring work with them, socialized, and really, made the time for that. Yeah.
I feel like they grew up in that generation. At some point we will do a podcast on the millennial generation because I'm fascinated by it.
Me too.
But I think that they grew up with that, like just sort of being hammered into them about that self-care piece. So it's always been a part of their life. Perhaps maybe too much.
Yes.
Right. Maybe there's a little bit too much inflexibility around that. Like sometimes you might need to cut into your lunch for 15 minutes or something like that. So thinking about your own life, because we're getting kind of sidetracked here, think about your own life. Like what would you want to do for self-care? What would be fun? What would be enjoyable? What would be relaxing? What would be nice? And how can you build that in? Maybe we're talking about like a dinner with friends once a month.
Yeah.
Date night can be self-care, right? Things like that. Like really kind of think about it, brainstorm it, first kind of your list of things, and then kind of figure out where you could build that into your routine. So Jenni, what do these things have to do with anxiety? Well, when you're building in time for yourself, you're kind of stopping the cycle of anxiety.
Yes.
You're kind of giving your brain a chance to shut off in terms of the anxious cycle, and giving yourself a chance to sort of feel fulfilled by other stuff. You're kind of refueling yourself. So I always like to talk about ourselves as cars. Someday I'll get a better, less crude analogy, but that's what I've got so far. When you have a car, you have to take it for oil changes. You've got to rotate the tires. Sometimes you've got to get new tires. You've got to put gas in it so it will go. We've got to put gas in ourselves. And for all of us, what fuels us is different. But for many of us, we're running on empty. And we're constantly just like refueling, like we're putting $2 more in the gas tank rather than like filling the tank.
Yeah.
We're just like pulling into the gas station, quickly refueling, and then moving on. That's not healthy. And I think that's actually not good for your car. I'm not an automotive person, so I don't really know.
Neither am I.
But that's kind of what I'm talking about with the self-care is how can you sort of really start to put more fuel in your tank? Self-care can do that.
Well, and self-care is not selfish.
Self-care is not selfish. Yeah. Oh, you hang out with me.
Well, this is your article that I'm reading from. So.
Oh, did I say it? Yes.
Yeah, you did.
That. Yeah, I say that a lot.
I like that. That's really important. Self-care is not selfish. And
also,
a lot of people think it is.
So yes, our generation, and I think for sure our parents' generation, that's the message. Self-care is this selfish thing.
Yep.
It's not. Also, no is a complete sentence. Those are two things I like to say a lot to people. So you can say no to things and you don't have to have a good reason. You could just say no.
Right.
So you don't even have to say, no, I can't attend that meeting because I'm going to be eating lunch at my desk. You can just say, no, that doesn't work for me. How about 2:00 instead?
Yes.
Like I was, had a group meeting, and it's hard to schedule group meetings when you're a bunch of adjunct faculty who like live all over the country in different time zones, and you've got other jobs and you're teaching. So it's always brutal to find something. And one of the proposed times was 11 p.m. or midnight, my time. Well, listen, I don't function. Like I am a morning person. I've realized that all of my best work happens in the morning. If I try to write or create something in the evening, it doesn't happen. My brain's like, nope, this is not optimal for me. I did once teach a class for 14 weeks. It started at 10:30. It was awful and I will never do it again. So even though it was just going to be one meeting, I said no.
Yeah.
And it was hard for me. I had to sort of talk it through with some friends first. It was hard for me to say no because it worked for literally everybody else, but it didn't work for me. And so I said no. And guess what? We found another time and it was okay.
Magically.
The world didn't implode.
Right.
Nobody hates me because of it. But quite frankly, if they do hate me because I didn't want to meet at midnight, well, I guess that tells me some things about them, but none of them did. But I said no. But the inclination was to just be like, okay, fine. I'll suffer, to make other people happy. It's okay to say no.
Well, and no is a complete sentence. And when you say no, you get to say yes to something else. And so maybe the yes is your self-care.
Right. Exactly. It was for me. It was a self-care. And I didn't just say no. That's it.
Right.
I said like no. And then what I did was I sent all of my availability for the rest of the week. Like, I can't do that time. Yeah. Here's all the other times that work for me. And I kind of took control of the conversation then.
Right.
And then we had something sort of scheduled within a couple of hours between all of us. So I encourage people to remember self-care is not selfish. I wasn't being selfish by saying no, I was taking care of myself. And also recognizing that I wasn't going to be much use at midnight at a meeting.
Right.
And also I was saying no, and it was okay.
So to recap, we have let go of perfection, rethink social media, because that's where you see a lot of that perfection. And then self-care is not selfish. Make room for self-care.
Right.
So next is number 4, which is relax.
Right. And so this could be what you decide to do as part of your self-care, right? You might decide to do something relaxing. But I pulled it out as a separate sort of its own tip because it is really important that you learn how to sort of calm and manage and quiet your thoughts. And a good way to do that is through relaxing. Right. So something like yoga, meditation, mindfulness training, all of that can be helpful to help you kind of quiet and ease your mind. It's really hard to do, though. If you are someone who's kind of highly anxious, highly driven, always kind of going, it's really hard to stop to stop and to stop
Absolutely.
your mind. So meditation can be really hard. There's wonderful apps out there.
I was just going to say, I'm a fan of an app called Headspace.
Headspace, Calm is
Yeah.
good. There's if you go to your app store, whether you're on like an Android platform or an iPhone, you go to your app store and you just type in meditation or mindfulness.
Yeah.
You can download a whole bunch of them. And on my list of things to do is actually to put out a couple of episodes about mindfulness and meditations, and actually do record some like guided meditations for folks to kind of
on my list,
lean into that.
Not episode wise, just for Josh's list is to get to meditate more. I'm not really.
You went through a period of time where you were meditating daily.
Loved it too.
You were a much nicer person.
I need to do it. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about self-care for a second. Making room for self-care, that's part of it. Having 5 minutes to just meditate. And lean into the mindfulness. I think it goes along with your health and wellness. That is self-care, really.
For sure.
Your own health and wellness.
It
Putting
is.
your own health and wellness first.
It is, for sure. And so
I need to do a much better job about that. And I'm happy to report my first step into really making room for self-care is I signed up for my first 5K. This summer, I was a huge, huge, huge fan of running for 3 to 5 years. And then I fell off the wagon hard, and I haven't run in a long time. My last race was like in 2016 or something. But I signed up for my first 5K in a long time in mid-July. So that's me doing some self-care.
I'm proud of you. Is that I'm also jealous because I just have lots of injuries.
You love running, but it's tough for you.
I injured myself in Mexico on vacation many, many years ago before we had children, and really should have. I
think that story belongs in a relationship episode.
I should have gone to a real doctor and had it looked at. So it flares and does not like when I run and throws everything else off, and I just have not made it a priority to go have surgery.
Well, now I have to get myself ready too for the 5K. So I've got. Is this
the Narragansett that you registered for? So that's a fun one.
It's one of it's
like
probably
a really pretty
my favorite
course, and then afterwards you get to sit and drink beer.
Yes,
I'm jealous that I'm not doing that with you.
Well, you'll be there. You can drink beer.
Can I? Can I?
Maybe.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. Maybe just runners.
I think just runners. There's a little beer tent after.
It's really grown a lot. It's at a beautiful college campus, and it's grown from just a 5K to a whole weekend. They do a 5K, a half, and a 10K, I think.
I kind of want to walk it. Maybe Jackson can do it with you.
I might talk to him. I was going to talk to him about it, actually.
We're talking this out loud. I know you registered for it yesterday in the middle of a baseball game.
I did.
While we were watching a baseball game.
I pulled the Band-Aid off of my self-care.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with relaxing, though. That's not going to be relaxing. But that was just you were going back to the self-care piece. So relaxing. So if you've never done yoga, if you've never meditated, if you've never tried mindfulness, try them.
Yes.
There's yoga.
Highly recommend.
Yoga can be as hard or as easy as you want it to be. You can go to a yoga studio. You can go to your local gym. I'm sure they will have a yoga class. Or there's a yoga app, too. I have a great yoga app. Let me see if I can find it on my phone.
Who's that yoga guy? The video, Rodney
Yee.
I
used to be able to do shoulder stands and head stands. Now I'm afraid to do them. I was doing them when I was in college, and so I wasn't really too worried. But now I'm afraid of.
That sounds like injury to me. If you try to do a shoulder stand.
Yes, it's called Yoga Studio, the app that I like.
You know what I always wanted to try was hot yoga.
Yeah, me too. I love yoga. It's great. So if you've never done yoga or meditation or mindfulness, it's easy to start. You can go to an app. You can go to a location that does it, but give it a try. And if you've done them before and kind of fallen out of practice, start again. So that relaxing, a lot of research shows that when you incorporate something like that, some sort of quiet activity like that, it can improve your anxiety symptoms.
Well, and own your own relaxation.
Right.
Some people might. For me, actually, running is relaxing.
Right.
Because I love it. I didn't love it as a kid. In fact, I hated it as a kid, but found it later in life. And for me, it's relaxing, or playing an instrument, or whatever your definition of relax is. Lean into it.
Okay.
Tip number 5. get moving.
Yeah. So
I guess I kind of was ahead of the game.
You were ahead of the game. Yeah. So physical exercise can be really beneficial to those with anxiety. And I'm not like, you don't have to then start going to the gym 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. It could be as simple as like a 10-minute walk. And so this could also be part of your self-care, right? This could be, you're tackling step number 5 while also conquering step number 3.
Yeah.
This could be part of your self-care. And this can be really hard to do. So you also have to kind of tackle it with you have to approach it the same way, planning it out. I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk before I cook dinner every night, or I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk before I put the kids on the bus in the morning. Some way to sort of work that physical activity into your life can really help with the anxiety. Now, I would caution with all 3 of these things, with the self-care, with the relaxation, and with the physical activity, to not set yourself up in a situation where you're going to make yourself more anxious, to not sort of overcommit yourself.
Okay.
I think goals can be really helpful for people. And so with my patients, I do that. What's kind of your goal?
Yeah.
If you've identified that you want to start walking more, what's a reasonable goal between now and the next time you come back? Sometimes they'll be like, oh, well, there's no reason I couldn't do it every day. And I'll say, that's great, but let's not set that as your goal, because then that can stress you out and really kind of undo things. If you set it for, I'm going to do it every day for a week, what happens when you miss that first day because it's raining or because something happens? Then you sort of sabotage yourself and say, well, I'm never going to I'm not meeting my goal anyways.
Right.
So really kind of think about setting a reasonable, realistic goal to start with, and then gradually build up from there. So think about those things.
Right. That's important. I mean, and physical activity could be not necessarily exercise, but, I know that friends of mine in town do a pickup basketball game once a week.
Right.
Or actually I enjoy yard work. Like I enjoy the physical activity of mowing the lawn or weed whacking or whatever. I'm sort of killing 2 birds with one stone, meeting your needs of talking about love language, right?
Doing an active
service for you and for our family and for our house. But for me, it's cathartic, and that's physical activity. Cool. Tip number 6.
Breathe. And I'm talking, most people don't know how to breathe. I know breathing
We could probably do a whole episode on breathing, right?
We could. Breathing is an automatic response, right? So right now I'm calling your attention to it. So you're very aware of your breathing now. But in general, we breathe. We don't think about it. We don't think, okay, I have to inhale and then exhale, and the oxygenation has to work its way through my whole body. We don't think that. Our brain handles that for us, just like our heart pumping. However, when we get anxious, when we get stressed, everything constricts, everything tightens. It's sort of like a response. We're sort of bracing ourselves, right? Like imagine when you're driving in your car and you look in your rearview mirror and you see like, oh gosh, the car behind me is not going to slow down, and you sort of brace, and then hopefully they do slow down and it's fine. But that feeling of tensing, you're sort of bracing for impact. We do that when we're stressed and when we're anxious too.
Absolutely.
And part of that response is our breathing kind of quickens. And so we're not fully oxygenating our body. We're not breathing fully. And so when I say breathe, I'm literally talking about breathing. I'm talking about carving out a few times a day where you sit there and you just focus on your breath. Like you really make sure that you're breathing fully, and you should put your hand on your chest and your hand on your belly, and you should feel both of them rise. We tend to just breathe into our chest and we don't take a deep breath. And so if we're really taking a deep breath, like all the way in, you should feel your stomach also rise. Yeah. So really kind of training yourself to feel what real breathing feels like, so that when you're in sort of a highly anxious state, you know the kind of breathing you should be doing.
Well, what really fascinates me actually is the square breathing technique. Will you talk about that?
I will, and it's kind of hard to explain verbally. Maybe that's because I'm a visual person. So I did put together some visual.
Well, it's about the visual.
Yeah, I put together some visual, aids on my Instagram page. So I will try to, you know what? I think I can actually attach one of them as a PDF to this episode.
Oh, cool.
So I will try to link those for you. But square breathing, I like because I am a visual person. So it's kind of breaking your breath down into 4 kind of equal segments, like 4 equal sides of a square. So you inhale for 4 seconds. This is something you should practice before you're in a highly anxious state, so that you can kind of figure out what the beats are for you. Are we talking about 4, like 1, 2,
Are there
3,
apps for this?
4.
Maybe?
There's tons of breathing apps.
Yeah.
I like to share a GIF with people that I also can put in the show notes. And I tell folks to put it on their phone. And it's this image that sort of, it's a bunch of shapes and they sort of expand outward and then they collapse in on themselves. And it's kind of a nice rhythm to it. And so it can be really helpful to pair your breathing with that. Like either inhale as the shapes kind of unfold and then exhale as they collapse on themselves, or you can do it the opposite way. So figuring out which of these sort of techniques works for you can be really helpful. And you should do it a couple times a day so that you're really kind of spending 5 minutes, 2 minutes a day focusing on really breathing.
Yeah.
And because you're focused on your breathing, either you're counting the breaths here. You didn't let me finish the square breathing.
Didn't.
No, you cut me off.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it'd be 4 beats on like the inhale, and then 4 beats you hold. And then 4 beats for the exhale, and then 4 beats for the hold. I was trying to do it while
you were talking.
I see. Well, so that's the point, right? Is this is part of the reason. Not only does the breathing actually, fully oxygenate your body, but also it makes you stop thinking because you have to focus on the breath. So either you have to focus on making sure that your hands on your chest and your belly are rising, or you're focusing on counting the breaths, or you're focusing on this picture, or you're focusing on an app that's doing it for you. You're not able to think about the things that you're anxious about. So these can be really great when you're also having a panic attack. Because for those of you that battle with anxiety, sometimes the anxiety becomes so profound that you actually have a panic attack. And I've had a couple, and they really do feel like you're dying. Like it feels like you're never going to catch your breath. And breathing, kind of bringing your center back to your breathing, can help you be grounded, and can help break the cycle of the panic attack.
Well, I want to say you have asthma, and so your panic attack
then triggered my asthma.
It triggered your asthma,
yeah.
So it's absolutely connected to breathing. But I wanted to mention, for me, I think the square breathing, the step 2, which is you hold your breath for a count of 4, that, the act of holding your breath comes with a little bit of stress, right? Like there's the holding your breath is hard to do, like because you want to breathe.
Yeah.
And so what I think works for me with the square breathing, which I don't do nearly enough, is step 3, which is you exhale. That relief of you breathe again, like you
right.
You're not holding your breath anymore, and so you've released that little tiny moment of stress where you were holding your breath.
That's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I never really thought about it that way.
Because you feel good in that moment. Step 3, when you hold your breath for a count of 4, and then you finally release it, like that feels good. It's a release.
Yeah. So focusing on that breath is something to do like now. And then when you are really stressed, you can kind of remind yourself to breathe, and you won't be learning how to breathe. Right. You'll just know these techniques. But that allows everything. Like I said earlier, anxiety is a cycle. And so the only thing that stops it is for something to actually stop it. And if you can sort of activate your brain enough to remember to breathe, that's going to stop that cycle. That's going to stop the cycle of the anxious thoughts and allow you to maybe have space to do something else.
And a lot of mindfulness and meditation is all about breathing.
Yes, for sure.
And visualizing your breath and sinking down to the ground, and it's all connected.
Really kind of grounding to your body and not allowing those thoughts, those anxious thoughts, to take over. So breathing is really important.
Breathe. Step number 6. Okay, moving on to step number 7, which is watch your diet.
Yeah, and I think everybody knows this, right? Like what foods make you feel good, what don't make you feel good, what's healthy, what's not. I'm not talking about diet to like lose weight. I'm talking about really kind of leaning into tracking your food and your intakes, whether that's your liquids, so what you're drinking, what you're eating.
Yeah.
And when you're drinking and eating, and seeing if that connects at all with your anxiety. So track that for a week and see, are there times a day where your anxiety is worse? And caffeine is really important for people to consider. Now, I'm not a coffee drinker, but if you are a coffee drinker, and Josh drinks like 7 cups of coffee a day.
That's true.
If you are a coffee drinker,
one right now as we talk to you guys.
And what number cup of coffee is this for you today?
3.
This is your 3rd cup of coffee, and it's like 1:00 on a
3.
Sunday.
I think it's 3.
But this is a typical
for me. And the problem is
intake.
with me, we can whatever. Caffeine doesn't affect me anymore. as far as energy or because it doesn't get me excited. But when I don't have the caffeine, I get headaches.
You're addicted to caffeine.
Maybe.
Okay. So, but a lot of people are. Like, a lot of people, like if you are in a place that you have Dunkin' Donuts, America runs on Dunkin' Donuts, right? Like, because of the coffee piece here.
Hey, they didn't pay
it's
us
not
for
the,
that.
It's not the donuts. It's the coffee. It's the coffee, the anxiety here.
Right,
I mean, the caffeine. But, so my point, if you are a coffee drinker, like most people, and if, like most coffee drinkers, you have more than 1 cup a day, and if, like many coffee drinkers, you have that in the afternoon, and you have anxiety, it's probably a good idea for you to kind of look at the relationship that you have with your caffeine, because caffeine triggers anxiety. So if you're already having anxious thoughts and you're kind of amped up a little bit on caffeine, it's not going to help your anxiety. And I've known people who have ordered sort of a decaf from like an extra large decaf from a coffee place, and they've later realized that it was caffeinated, and then they've had a panic attack because they have sort of a baseline high anxiety.
Interesting.
And then when they have the extra caffeine, it like shoots them over the edge, because caffeine is so powerful. So if you are someone who has anxiety and drinks a lot of coffee, I would encourage you to start to think about changing that a little bit and seeing if that changes your anxiety for you. Typically, I would have you start with the later in the day stuff. Well, switching maybe to like half calf, half decaf.
I'm just going to say, because decaf, if people don't know, we could do a coffee episode.
Ugh, that sounds terrible.
I'm a huge coffee fan. I worked in food service in a coffee shop for a long time when I was in college. Anyway,
he was a barista.
I was a barista.
So going to Starbucks with him is never fun, because he's always like
well, they've changed the whole model. All right,
let's
it's a whole big thing.
I know.
Don't get me started. Anyway,
they don't tamper stuff anymore. Ristrettos, I don't know.
You're just saying coffee words. You have no idea. Excuse me. Decaf is not actually 100% decaf.
Right, but it's less caffeinated than...
Yes. So if you're someone that's like, oh, I need caffeine, and it's going to trigger your anxiety, and you're trying to listen to what Jenny's saying about tip number 7 here, you can switch to decaf and still have a little bit of caffeine, because there is. And then they do have half caffs.
And I would say, but don't make a sudden switch. So don't be like, all right, Jenny says to cut back my caffeine, so tomorrow I'm having no coffee instead of 7 cups of coffee. Which
I tried once and it was no good.
Yeah, and even though I was like, dude, you can't do that. It's your coffee.
I got this.
So think about making that change gradually, but really pay attention to that. Likewise, are there foods that you're eating that maybe are making your anxiety worse? You know, like, is chocolate making it worse for you? Are there things that are causing you sort of gastrointestinal stuff here? So kind of really pay attention to your diet. Not for the purposes of losing weight, but for the purposes of seeing if there's any patterns with your anxiety.
Right.
Okay. And alcohol. So alcohol is a depressant. And a lot of folks are realizing that, you know, when I drink excessively, then the next morning I feel lousy and I feel anxious. And then I feel gross that entire day and really anxious. And then what makes me feel better is to drink again. And then it's in this cycle, this constant, like, sort of negative.
Sounds like a fun weekend.
Self-talk. Well, but I think a lot of people wind up in that pattern.
Right.
So also think about, I know you're being facetious. But I think for a lot of people, especially depending on sort of your age, that's a typical weekend.
It is. Well, I wanted to call back to the start of the episode. Well, actually, at the start of the episode also, but your start of the article where you mentioned you might find that you're starting to turn to some unhealthy coping tools such as cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, and food. And that's what you're basically saying here is that watch your diet. Don't use these things as a way to combat the anxiety, because it's going to have the opposite effect.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Same with the cigarettes. Same with e-cigarettes. But those things tend to become a little more that's an addiction, and so that can be anxiety provoking to try to come back on those things. It'll be easier for you to kind of quit those habits if you've built up other coping strategies. If you've kind of really leaned into the stuff on this list, then that'll make it easier for you to start to cut back on the other stuff. But to really kind of be aware of what you're utilizing as unhealthy coping strategies, and what maybe are things that you hadn't even thought about that might be contributing in terms of what you're intaking that could be contributing to your anxiety.
Well, caffeine and nicotine are similar in that they're stimulants, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tip number 8. find a counselor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, right? Because I am a counselor. I'm a therapist. I've had a therapist. I have a therapist. I think everybody should have a therapist. I think it's a really great idea to have someone in your life who's not a friend, who's not family, who's not a coworker, who is an impartial person with some clinical training who's there to help you process stuff.
It's good to have those other things in your life, but
for sure.
So nobody that you are is obligated to provide that service.
Yeah,
to you.
But more so, nobody that you're going to feel guilty about venting to, right? Because so often what I hear from people is, I don't want to vent to my friends. I feel bad. I don't want to complain about it again. I don't want to burn them out. I've said the same thing to them. And so they don't wind up sharing it with anybody. So really think about finding yourself a counselor. And you don't have to go weekly. You don't have to go every other week. You don't even have to go monthly. I have some folks that I see that, once we kind of get through the initial sort of assessment period, I'm getting kicked by a dog. Apparently I'm interfering with his nap.
I know we say this a lot, but it wouldn't be changing perspectives if Jenny wasn't interrupted
flanked by dogs.
Fur babies.
So once they go through sort of the initial intake with me, then maybe they just come in for sort of a tune-up. They just kind
and that's okay, right?
Or they say, like, can I call you when something comes up? And
just made another car reference, by the way.
I really, that's sort of my mindset there.
I smell a book in the work.
I'll need a snazzy title.
Yeah.
You keep interrupting me and it keeps losing my train of thought.
I'm good at that.
But the foundation is there. So then if I don't see them for like a year, I just had a patient, we sort of terminated stuff 11 months ago. And then they reached out to me and they said, I know you're really full, but can you fit me in? And most clinicians will always fit in a previous client.
Well, we've done that.
Yes.
With our therapist.
With our therapist. And so, sure. And so they came back and I didn't have to like go through the whole story with them again. I knew there was the foundation there. So I think everyone should have a counselor for that purpose. So the foundation is there. We've all got stuff we want to work on. We all can kind of find a way to improve ourselves. And maybe having a counselor or a therapist would help you sort of work through some of this stuff, whether it's anxiety or depression. But find a counselor. So I really like Psychology Today as a website, www.psychologytoday.com. You can literally sort by anything. You can sort by area. You can say, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield, so I only want to look at therapists that take my insurance. I only want to look at female therapists. I only want to look at therapists that work specifically and specialize in anxiety. And then they'll give you a phone number or an email address or both, or a link to their website. You can read their little profile. They're really fantastic. And I tell folks, unfortunately, when you're looking for a counselor, you have to kind of cast a wide net. And I say to reach out to at least 3, because some therapists are good about getting back to you and some are not. And so cast that wide net, reach out to a few, and know that your first 1 or 2 may not be a good fit. Right. And that doesn't mean that counseling and therapy isn't a good fit for you. It means that therapist isn't. And it doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong with that therapist. It just means that it's not a good fit. So much of, obviously there needs to be training and experience and licensure for a good therapist. But then a big part of it is just fit. At the beginning of this episode, no, it was the beginning of last episode, our little pint-sized perspectives. I was talking about that grief group in Dead to Me.
Name sticking.
And I talked about sort of professional use of self and when a sort of therapist discloses some things.
Yeah.
A big part of a professional use of self for a therapist is their personality. Who I am as a therapist is who I am. I'm not, some pieces of myself I sort of, guard a little bit more as a therapist, as a clinician, but in general, I am who I am. Like, I'm someone that uses humor. I've got sort of a dry, sarcastic sense of humor. I'm pretty self-deprecating. I am who I am. That may work for some people. It may not work for others. That doesn't mean I'm a bad therapist, and that doesn't mean that for that patient, therapy is a bad fit. It just means that we're not a good fit for each other. So I tell people when they're looking for a therapist to cast that wide net and be prepared that it might not be a good fit the first time. So it's okay. It's hard to have to go meet people over and over again, but it might take 2 or 3 therapists before you find the one that's a good fit. Totally be worth it in the end. most people that come to see me and they've never been to a therapist before, they're terrified for their first session. It's scary to walk in and meet a stranger and then like pour out your heart and soul to them when you know nothing about them, like
Right.
the therapist. But most of them feel better, like a weight has been lifted even after that first session. So really kind of think about that, finding a therapist.
All right. So tip number 9 is be open to medication.
Yeah. So
a little bit of a taboo topic, maybe?
It is a little bit of a taboo topic. I think because we've become a society that is so open to medication. We're so open to sort of popping a pill, to like prescribing a pill. Most people will wind up on an anti-anxiety medication because they've gone to their doctor. They've gone to their general practitioner. Yeah. They've got some health issues going on. The doctor says what's going on. They're like, oh, I'm super stressed. So they write them a prescription for like a Xanax or something. And I'm not knocking general practitioners, but I think it's dangerous territory because they're not doctors that specialize in psychiatric medication. I think psychiatric medication is best prescribed by a psychiatric provider, someone who's only specializing in that.
Psychopharmacology.
And we're not too far out from the years where like the drugs that were prescribed by general practitioners were the drugs that the pharmaceutical reps were pushing. You know, like, oh, I have these. I mean, I think my first antidepressant that I went on, was because, no, it was you, I think.
It was me. I had free samples.
The doctor was like, I have these free samples from someone just brought these in. It seems like it's a good drug.
And
why don't you try this? And I think it was Lexapro, which is still a really commonly used medication. But it was prescribed to you because that's what the pharmaceutical reps pushed. We were parents, but we were either parents or we were becoming parents. So we're talking within the past 15 years ago, but not that long.
Not long, yeah.
Not that long.
But it didn't work for me at all.
No.
But it was only because he had samples.
Right. That's my point. So we're not that far removed from that. So there are still people that are on these medications solely because that's what the doctor had free samples for. So
what do you say to people that say, I don't want to be on a tranquilizer?
Well, I would say it's 2019 and we have made huge improvements in our medication technologies. And so we're much better able to control sort of side effects and understand better what these medications do. And so there's different classes of medications that target different areas of the brain. So I don't know that I would call myself a proponent of medication. But probably for anxiety and depression, those are the two biggest areas where I say if it's significant enough that it's interfering in your life, and you're having a really hard time sort of being able to utilize these techniques that we've talked about, then it's probably a good idea to be open to medication. And when I say that, I mean to meet with a psychiatric provider, someone who can prescribe. So therapists cannot always prescribe. I cannot prescribe. Right. I'm not a prescriber. Psychiatrists can, some psychologists can, and I prefer psychiatric nurse practitioners. They tend to sort of have more time available. It's really hard to find a prescriber, but I'm saying go meet with them, talk about your symptoms with them, and then be willing to kind of see.
They're the experts.
They're the experts, and they're going to sort of trial things with you. Mm-hmm. Not like, here's some samples, I'll see you back in 6 months, but here's what I think you should take, and here's why, and we're going to sort of slowly amp you up onto these medications. We're going to monitor your side effects. You're going to come back here in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. You're going to call me. You're going to email me. We're going to be in communication.
Right.
So it's really closely monitored. It might not work for you. But if we're talking about anxiety and panic, remember I said it's a cycle for anxiety. You need something to stop that cycle.
Right.
Sometimes your self-talk, these self-care changes, sometimes they're not powerful enough to be the stop. So it's a medication that would be the stop. That would then hopefully allow you some more space to utilize these techniques and then not be able to utilize the meds so much.
Well, and you're saying too, let me try to understand. You're not saying only meds, right?
Never.
This is going to be in the setting of all these other tips. You can't just be like, oh, I don't have to worry about mindfulness. I don't have to worry about getting being physical.
Because I'm just going to take a Xanax.
Yeah, no. And I don't have to worry about whatever.
I think there are a lot of people out
diet,
there doing
I'll
that.
Eat whatever I want, and then just pop these Xanax, and I'll be fine.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm saying as part of sort of your toolkit, maybe be open to medication.
Right.
And I would say with my patients, it's for the most part a long time before I bring up medication with them. And it's once we've sort of gone through all of this whole list, and maybe perhaps we've started to see a pattern, or we're starting to see lots of panic attacks and just sort of patients not being able to sort of activate their brain and turn on their brain and shut off the sort of thought process, the negative thought process. That's when I will say, what are your thoughts on medication?
So give us a little bit of a crash course in psychopharmacology, if you could.
No, I cannot,
because
I'm not a psychiatric provider.
Right now. No, I know, but like, how it's a chemical reaction in the brain, right?
Yes.
That contributes to these feelings of anxiety and depression, all that stuff. So your medications are assisting in that chemical reaction.
Yeah,
right,
they're either like dulling one of the like the neurotransmitters that's being released, or they're sort of amplifying the ability for it to sort of work and be effective. So each sort of different class of medication is going to sort of target the sort of chemicals in the process in the brain a little bit differently.
And that's the technology you're talking about. It's
right.
not like you're taking lithium and you're doing the lithium shuffle down the street, but these are targeted.
Well, people are still on lithium. I feel like that's a pretty offensive thing that you just said. Like folks who have a bipolar diagnosis are still quite often prescribed.
But even lithium, I think, probably it's a different type of lithium than it was 25, 30 years ago.
That I don't know. I would assume. I would assume so. But
gone are the days of just being numb on medication.
Yeah, but I feel so. Yes, and I feel like
I apologize for the offensive.
But I feel like that is kind of what there is offensiveness. There is a stigma out there around psychiatric medication, and you just fell into it.
Yeah.
Right? Like the lithium shuffle. You're kind of talking down about people who, there might be people out there right now who are like, well, I'm on lithium.
Well, I mean, my point is, though, the medications in 2019 are like, don't be afraid. That's my point.
I get that that's your point. I get that that's your point.
Of psychiatric medication.
Also, though,
psychotropic
you just are contributing to the stigma around like that negative sort of image around being on medication, which is why a lot of people, when I say, what are your thoughts on medication, will be like, I don't want to be one of those people. I don't want to need medication. I don't want to have to be reliant. I don't want to be all doped up. I don't want people to know that I need a medication. This is why, with like comments like that.
Yeah.
Do you own that?
I own it.
Okay.
Listen to Jenny, not me. But my point, my
I think you're trying
was to say, don't be afraid.
Well,
of exploring these.
I think
as a way to help you.
If we think about what the general sort of understanding about anti-anxiety medication used to be, it used to be tranquilizers. It used to be like, you know, like if you watch any movie that takes place in like the 50s or 40s, if any woman cried or was hysterical, they like gave her a tranquilizer to manage her anxiety and it knocked her out. Not what we're talking about now. Granted, when you are starting a new medication, you do need to be aware of how it's going to react. You know, is it going to make you drowsy? Things like that. What are the sort of interactions going to be? So it's something that should not be entered into without great thought.
Right.
But could be really beneficial for folks.
Well, as you had explained, I think in episode 19, we don't re-record or do retakes. That was a real interaction you just heard between me and Jenny, because we didn't talk about that before or whatever. Yeah, it wasn't a fight or anything. It was just a good conversation, like a back and forth about. And you called me to task on what I said, so I appreciate it. All right. Ready for the last tip?
The last tip.
The last tip. Tip number 10. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I think we're all really good about being beating ourselves up. And being hard on ourselves. This kind of goes back to sort of that perfectionism at the beginning. Really, nobody is going to be kind to us. Nobody's going to put us first.
Nope.
We have to do that ourselves. We have to be the ones that are kind to ourselves, that are nurturing to ourselves, that forgive ourselves. Give yourself permission is also a phrase I use a lot. So I guess I have some common phrases, right? Like lean into things.
Yeah.
No is a complete sentence. Self-care is not selfish. And also this sort of give permission. And when I sort of share that with patients, a lot of them will say, I like that.
Can I just say how
permission?
Back to lean into it. We were at a friend's house last night and someone said, did you hear?
No, I missed this. I heard it. I heard you say something about trademark.
Someone said lean into it. And I said, hey, did you pay us for that? Oh. That's not a trademark. Did they use it in the Yeah, but they said it just to shout us out, like shout out the podcast.
Which they're one of our friends,
which I thought was very sweet.
Podcast. Yeah. So give yourself permission to take care of yourself, to be kind to yourself, to be forgiving, to kind of say nice things to yourself. What's really interesting is that, if there's any students out there that have never had me before that currently have me or have me in the future, I guess I am going to spoil things for you. But at the end of every semester for my graduate classes, what I do on the very last day is I essentially put students in the hot seat. I give students a moment, all of the students a moment to sort of fill out this paper. And this is an online class, so it's like an online notepad or a Google Doc. And I have every student's name. And after 14 weeks together, I then give everyone like 10, 15 minutes to fill out something and say something nice, to write something nice about every student in the class. So, there's a list that says like Josh, there's a list that says Jenny, and then every student kind of writes something nice about Josh, something nice about Jenny, something nice about all the students.
I've overheard this when you do this.
Right.
I can't hear just so everybody knows, I can't hear what anybody else is saying.
You can hear me.
I can hear Jenny when she's reading a class. I always love that part of your class.
So everybody does, but it's really uncomfortable. And I will circle it back and around and you'll understand how it ties in. So then after everyone does that and it's all nice and everything, then I pull everyone back together into our sort of classroom. We're all on video monitors. We can all see each other. And I have the ability to make one person's video screen bigger. So they become sort of like the central focus on the screen. So I, one at a time, put the student in the middle of the screen. So if I was doing this in a live classroom, I would actually have them come to the front of the class. So they're in the middle of everybody. They're in front of everybody. Super uncomfortable, super awkward. And then I read them all of the things that their classmates have said about them. I force them to sit and hear good stuff. And it is so freaking uncomfortable for everybody to sit there and hear good stuff because we don't do this.
Yeah.
Right? We don't value this. We value sort of, continuing to get better and improve and take constructive criticism and work towards perfection. And we don't ever really give people an opportunity to sit there and really hear genuinely nice things about themselves from other people. So there's often like tears. People are very anxious and having to kind of work with their anxiety. Right. It's not optional and make you do it. And then at the end of the semester, they have this written stuff. And it was interesting last term. I had a student who I was in an advanced groups class and they took my intro to groups class. So I'd had them for my intro class, then I have them in my advanced groups class. So they had done it before. And they said at the end of the second round, they said, I want you to know that I kept the write-up like you told us to. And when I was having a really bad time and really questioning my value as a social work student, I took that back out to read the words people had said to me. And it was really powerful because then I send it all to them and they have it forever to keep. That's being kind to, that speaks to how little we do to be kind to ourselves, to really be kind to ourselves. So to really think about a way to nurture yourself, to be kind to yourself. Mm-hmm. Maybe it means at the end of every day, you journal about the good things you did that day or something that you're proud of. Maybe it means that you wake up in the morning and you give yourself positive affirmations. I know it's cheesy, it's hokey, but think about a way to really kind of be kind to yourself because no one else is going to be kind to you. So why are you being kinder to other people than you would ever be to yourself? And why would you treat yourself unlike you would ever treat anybody else? So really kind of think about that. Right. Like we tend to say really mean things to ourselves, think real mean things about ourselves, but we don't say those things to other people because it's not kind.
Well, you wrote in the article, accept that you're human.
Yeah.
Accept. And I think that's a really important point. I mean, nobody's perfect, everybody's flawed, and you need to forgive yourself and be kind to yourself. So accept that you're not perfect and then celebrate those things that other people like about you. I think that the activity that you do in the classes is huge. And specific to the subject matter you're teaching, I mean, you have to be vulnerable as a counselor or a therapist, right? Like you have to sort of put yourself out there, even if you don't share your real self. I mean, you've got everybody has their work self or whatever, but you still have to be vulnerable to ask the right questions and to be listening. Listening is hard, and it forces you to be vulnerable. And I think that's a really cool activity that you do.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I think I actually stole that from my work in hospice. I think my team leader did that one day after a particularly string of really difficult losses. Our team was really struggling, and she kind of did that with flip chart paper.
Oh, that's cool.
and didn't make us all stand up in front of the room, but still it was that sort of like all of the teammates had to say something nice about everybody, and then we sort of had it there visually. It was really powerful.
I've done a similar activity. There was like the leadership team, we were together at work and we did some sort of leader training, and we put something nice about everybody on popsicle sticks.
Oh.
And then everybody had a bucket or whatever, a little tiny bucket, and you put the popsicle sticks in the bucket. And everybody brought it back to their offices, and mine's sitting on a shelf, and I haven't looked at it in ages.
That. You should look at it.
I should look at it.
Yeah.
This reminded me to look at that bucket.
Yeah.
With all the nice stuff
really
people said about me.
No reason why you couldn't add to that bucket, right? If I were your therapist, I would say, here's a homework assignment for you.
Interesting.
I would want you to go home or go to work and look at that bucket and give yourself 10 minutes. No emails, no phone, no interruptions, and really kind of say, like, take each popsicle stick out, read it out loud, so you're auditorily hearing it too. Yeah. And then I want you to write 3 more about yourself and put it in the bucket.
Do you want to bill my insurance?
I would, because you have really good insurance. Yeah.
No, that was that's a good suggestion. I might do that actually.
Thanks.
All right, Jenny. Let's review real quick. Recap.
Okay.
So the 10 best ways to manage anxiety. Number 1 is let go of perfection. Number 2 is rethink social media. Number 3 is make room for self-care. Self-care is not selfish. Number 4 is relax, which goes hand in hand with self-care. It could anyway. As well as number 5, which is get moving, some physical exercise. Breathe. That square breathing technique. I think everybody should try that or download an app for breathing. That's really cool. Number 7 is watch your diet. Stay away from the caffeine. Number 8 is find a counselor. Number 9, be open to medication. And number 10 is be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Anything else to add? Thanks for taking us through that.
No, I think it's certainly not an exhaustive list. This is a start.
Right.
But if you're struggling with anxiety, now is probably a really good time to really kind of start thinking about how to make it so that you're not struggling so much and that you can have more quality in your life, because life is short and you deserve to not have to be feeling so anxious all the time.
Yes. Lean into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, I think that was it. So,
alrighty.
Yeah, thank you for. Hopefully, this is coming out on a Tuesday because of the Monday holiday. So, hopefully that worked okay for everybody. We'll kind of see what the feedback is.
Yeah. Hopefully, you enjoyed our pint-sized perspective episode yesterday, a mini episode or a little pop culture, little taste of pop culture with a review of Dead to Me, and hope you enjoyed this anxiety episode. So that is going to do it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more on this by checking out changingperspectivesblog.com, Jenny's blog article, The 10 Best Ways to Manage Anxiety. You can also find Jenny on medium.com, actually. If you go to medium.com /@JennyBrennan, LICSW, you can find a bunch of Jenny's writing. Yeah, and actually one of the first articles I see is The 10 Best Ways to Manage Anxiety.
That was one of my first articles on Medium that got picked up and published in got picked up by some editors, curators, and then published in one of their publications. So apparently it's something people are interested in.
You can also check out National Institute of Mental Health. They've got some great resources on anxiety. Just as a reminder, this episode was for education and entertainment purposes only. Should you need additional support, please contact your healthcare provider for information and referrals. Follow us on Facebook, please, at Changing Perspectives Podcast, on Instagram at Changing Perspectives Blog. You can check out our website by going to changingperspectivesblog.com or send us an email to changingpodcast@gmail.com. Go ahead and subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode, and we will see you next time. Say bye, Jenny.
Bye, Jenny.
The Changing Perspectives podcast is produced, recorded, and edited by Dizzy-Bird Studios, Whitman, Massachusetts. Visit Dizzy-Bird Studios on Facebook, facebook.com/DizzyBirdStudios.
We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. My name is Taylor Eland, and I host a show called Just Think, where I look into philosophy, theology, and other scientific ologies to figure out the underlying workings of an argument. If you would like to learn something new every week while getting both sides of a theory, go ahead and check us out on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, and Google Podcasts, along with various other networks on Sundays.